They all laughed when he walked in, worn boots, quiet eyes, and a lunchbox held tighter than his pride. No one knew he once commanded entire battlefields with a chessboard. And certainly not the CEO, until she found herself across from him, cornered not by charm, but by sheer brilliance. If stories like this stir something in you, dignity loves second chances, then consider subscribing. We bring quiet heroes to light one move at a time. Now let's begin the story of a single dad, a forgotten genius, and the game that changed everything. At precisely 7:45 a.m., as the morning rush streamed through the revolving glass doors of Stonebridge Financial Tower, no one noticed the man polishing the marble floor beneath the grand brass clock. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a violinist who respected the silence between each note more than the note itself. His uniform was a faded navy blue, the kind military men keep long after retirement, not out of necessity, but out of reverence. The patch on the shoulder had been worn smooth from years of quiet service. His name was Jack Walker, and to most, he was just the janitor. To his 12-year-old son, Ben, seated quietly on the nearby bench with a notebook in his lap, Jack was a giant disguised in humility. Ben didn't speak much. His world was quieter than most. But every morning as his father cleaned, Ben would sketch the same thing over and over again, chessboards. Not from imagination, from memory, from watching Jack play silently against himself during breaks, pieces whispering across the board like old friends in conversation. The guards called it the old man's weirdo hobby, but Ben called it something else, Dad's other language. It was a Tuesday when everything began to shift. A junior analyst named Trevor, barely 25, still smelling of cologne and arrogance, strolled past Jack with a half-empty latte and a smirk. "Hey, chess guy," Trevor called out loud enough for the receptionist to hear. "How's the mop opening variation going? Think you could take on my AI app? Just coded a chess bot last night. That'll eat you alive." Jack looked up calmly, eyes kind. "I don't play to eat," he said with a grin. "But I'll take a game." Laughter bubbled across the lobby. Trevor pulled out his phone and opened a sleek digital chessboard, tapping furiously. "All right, Mr. Floor Waxer, let's see if that mop handle teaches you openings." Ben's grip tightened around his notebook. The game lasted 7 minutes. Jack played white and opened with a deceptively simple knight to f3. Trevor responded with overconfidence, flashy, premature moves. Jack countered not with aggression, but with precision. At move 6, he launched into a fried liver attack, a classic Italian game tactic that lures overeager players into deadly traps. By move 12, Trevor's queen was pinned, and his king had nowhere left to run. "Checkmate," Jack said, gently wiping the screen. Silence followed. No applause, just the unmistakable sound of a young man realizing he didn't understand half as much as he thought he did. Trevor turned red. You memorized that, didn't you?" Jack shook his head. "No, I read it." Read what? Jack looked down at the imaginary board still glowing on the screen. "Your impatience." Ben smiled. An hour later, on the 42nd floor, Madeline Stone, CEO of Stonebridge, youngest woman to lead a Fortune 500 firm, master of data-driven decision-making, reviewed a report on internal morale. A line caught her attention. Lobby engagement increased 27% this week, largely due to chess match between maintenance staff and junior analyst. She raised an eyebrow. Chess with a janitor. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen. "Schedule a floor visit," she said to her assistant. "Let's see what kind of games we're playing downstairs." The next morning, Jack returned to his usual spot, unaware that his next opponent wouldn't be a cocky intern, but a woman who'd once been called the Queen of the Boardroom by the Wall Street Journal. Ben sat beside the chess set. Jack had carved himself one, he only brought out when the lobby was quiet. But today, it wasn't. There was a small crowd gathering already. Something was different. That's when she arrived. Madeline Stone didn't walk, she strode. Her heel struck the marble like a metronome, her black suit tailored to perfection. She moved like someone who had nothing to prove, and proved everything anyway. Her eyes scanned the scene, locking onto Jack. "You're the janitor?" Jack rose slowly. "I'm Jack. I'm Madeline." She paused, studying the board. "Play me." Ben looked up, his pupils dilated. Jack's hand hesitated near a pawn. "Are you sure?" Jack asked softly. "I don't do things I'm not sure of," Madeline replied, sitting. And with that she moved her first piece e4. The king's pawn opening. Jack inhaled deeply, fingers grazing the edge of his own pawn. He countered with c6, the Caro-Kann defense, a system for those who favored resilience over retaliation. Ben watched, like someone watching a hurricane form over still waters. By move 5, Jack had entered the Bronstein-Larsen variation, a choice so old-school and elegant that even most grandmasters overlooked it. Madeline attacked with precision, every move aggressive sharp. But Jack didn't retreat. He redirected. He absorbed. He shifted tension like a sailor catching the wind with a torn sail. At move 14, she sacrificed her knight to try a queenside blitz. Jack responded not with a block, but a pin trapping her queen between her own pawns and his dark square bishop. Ben whispered, without realizing, "She's boxed." On move 17, Madeline Stone Wall Street's unshakable tactician fell into checkmate. She stared at the board, blinked, and then did something that made the lobby freeze. She smiled, not out of condescension, but recognition. "Who taught you to play like that?" she asked quietly. Jack didn't boast. He simply said, "Life, war, love, loss. They all play by the same rules if you look close enough." Madeline didn't respond. She just nodded, then turned to Ben. "You watch him?" Ben nodded. "Do you play?" The boy's eyes glimmered. "Not to win," he said softly. "To listen." Madeline's face changed. She didn't speak. She simply walked away. But in that moment, everyone in the lobby, from Trevor the coder to the security guard, saw what they hadn't seen before. This janitor didn't just clean floors. He opened minds. And that boy, he might just be his father's most powerful move yet. It had been a long time since Madeline Stone had lost anything, a pitch, a deal, a negotiation, even a round of debate. Losing was not in her vocabulary, especially not to a janitor, especially not on a Tuesday morning. The elevator doors opened to the 42nd floor, the glass reflecting her unreadable expression as she stepped out and walked past her assistant without a word. She moved like a shadow, with a mission swift, soundless, surgical. She entered her office and closed the door behind her. For a moment she just stood there, silent. The board, the way he played, the calm. Jack Walker. He hadn't looked at her like she was a CEO, or a challenge, or anything to conquer. He looked at her like she was a player on the board, equal worthy and flawed. And yet, he had seen something she hadn't seen in herself in a long time. Hesitation. Madeline sank into her leather chair, spinning slowly to face the skyline. The city sprawled out before her like a massive humming chessboard, towers like rooks and queens, the rivers like borders, streets like files, and ranks stretching into infinite patterns. But even in that vastness, her mind replayed only 17 moves, and one man who dismantled everything she thought she knew about control. It wasn't just the loss that bothered her, it was the gentleness in how he delivered it. He didn't boast, didn't smirk. He played with the stillness of someone who had nothing to prove, and yet had earned the right to prove everything. She reached across the desk and opened a slim silver laptop. A few keystrokes. A search. Jack Walker. No LinkedIn. No recent social presence. But a buried veterans article from 2013, Captain Jack Walker, U.S. Army Tactical Advisor, decorated for Operation Narrow Ridge 2005, known for developing silent strategy communication through nonverbal grid simulations. Widower. One son. Madeline leaned back, eyes narrowing. He wasn't just a janitor. He was once a war tactician. That evening, while most executives were at rooftop lounges or private gyms, Madeline found herself lingering by the lobby exit, watching Jack as he finished mopping near the West Wing. She hated small talk. She despised interruption. But something compelled her feet forward. "You played Bronstein's line into the Karo Khan," she said casually. Jack glanced up, not surprised, not smug, just present. "Only when I sense aggression covered in elegance," he replied. A small smile formed at the corner of her lips. "I was reckless." He shook his head. "You were bold. There's a difference." She paused. "I used to play a lot." "In college." He nodded toward the board. "You still do." "No," she said, eyes drifting. "I calculate. I don't listen anymore." Jack tilted his head. "Pieces talk. They don't lie. Most people just forget how to hear them." Silence. She looked at the clock, 6:12 p.m. No one else in the lobby. Just them and the echoes of waxed marble under dimmed lighting. "Play me again," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You sure I don't do things I'm not sure of?" she said automatically, then paused. "Except this, apparently." Ben emerged quietly from the side notebook in hand. His eyes twinkled with a knowing curiosity. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The board was reset. This time Madeline played black. Jack opened with D4, the Queen's pawn opening. Solid. Classical. She responded with NF6 Indian defense. He continued with C4. She mirrored with E6. The Nimzo Indian variation took shape a battleground of subtle positional warfare. No flashy tactics, only deep plans and layered feints. By move 10, the tension was high but not explosive. Jack maneuvered like a sculptor refining contours. Madeline countered like a mathematician solving for X. Move 14. She pinned his knight. Move 15. He sacrificed a pawn. Ben shifted on the bench. His fingers scribbled. Jack smiled faintly. "I see you still favor direct lines." "Madeline?" "And I see you still favor traps, disguised as gifts." She advanced her queen. But on move 17, Jack executed a quiet move RE1. It looked insignificant, but it wasn't. It opened a latent attack vector not immediately, but 2, maybe 3 moves later. The board shifted. Suddenly, her bishop was overextended, her king's side loose. She recognized it too late. Jack didn't checkmate her this time. He didn't need to. She resigned in silence, then leaned back. "You knew I'd fall for that." Jack gently adjusted a single piece. "I hoped you'd see it coming, but I knew you'd fight with honor." She looked at him. Really looked. Not like a janitor. Not like a veteran. But like a man who had seen loss pain time and had chosen, somehow, grace. "Why do you still play?" she asked. "Because it's the only place left," Jack said, "where truth and consequence still shake hands." Madeline left the lobby that night with a feeling she hadn't had in over a decade. Not confusion. Not frustration. But respect. And somewhere beneath the ironclad strategies that governed her every move, she felt something begin to thaw. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't played her most important game yet. Ben liked to sit quietly, not because he didn't have things to say, but because silence gave him more information than words ever could. It was in the silence where he saw people most clearly, their hesitations, their habits, the way their hands hovered over a chess piece longer than they should. That morning he sat at his usual bench near the corner of the lobby notebook, resting on his knees, a pencil worn down to the nub in his hand. He wasn't sketching this time. He was remembering. The way her hand shook just slightly after she lost. The way his dad's eyes softened as he placed his last piece. The way no one in the lobby laughed anymore. Something had changed, not just in how people looked at Jack, but in how they looked at Ben. "Is your dad really a janitor?" someone had whispered at school. "He beat a computer right," I heard the CEO cried. Ben didn't answer. He just shrugged. He didn't need to say it, because the board spoke for him. That afternoon, just after the lunch hour, the lobby lights dimmed slightly as clouds rolled across the sky outside. Jack placed the chessboard back on the table. Same worn wood, same ivory and obsidian pieces, edges rounded with time. It had belonged to Grace, his wife. She gave it to him on their 5th anniversary, and every game he played since then was a conversation he still had with her. Ben watched him set up the pieces, but something was different today. Jack reached into the cloth pouch where he kept the chess set. He hesitated. Then slowly, for the first time in nearly a decade, he pulled out the queen. The white queen, tall, carved with delicate ridges, her crown chipped on one side, had not seen the board in 9 years. Ben's breath caught. His hand froze on the page. "You're using Mom," he whispered. Jack didn't look up. "No," he said softly. "I'm remembering her." When Madeline Stone returned to the lobby that day, she didn't arrive alone. A camera crew followed at a respectful distance, part of a weekly marketing initiative titled Humans of Stonebridge. She hated fluff content, but her team insisted. The press had caught wind of her match with Jack, and social media was already turning the janitor into a local legend. Normally, she'd have squashed it, but this wasn't normal. She approached the table without theatrics. No blazer, no heels, just slacks, flats, and a quiet intention. "May I?" she asked. Jack nodded. Ben gently placed the queen in its place on the board. The camera zoomed in, and Ben saw the moment Madeline's expression changed. Not because of the queen, but because of what it meant. The queen had returned. Jack played white again. He opened with e4, a strong central thrust, aggressive, commanding. Madeline responded with c5, the Sicilian defense. It was a declaration. "I'm not here to lose." By move 5, the board had taken on a tense geometry. Pawns danced in asymmetry. Knights threatened diagonals. Jack advanced with a closed Sicilian, opting for positional pressure over blitzing fire. Each move was precise, measured. Madeline fought back with intensity, not rushed, but sharp, like the flick of a scalpel. Her rook took center. Her queen maneuvered with confidence. Ben scribbled furiously in his notebook. He wasn't just recording the moves, he was translating emotion. His father's patience, Madeline's hunger, and something new, a mutual respect forming across the board. Move 16. Jack offered a bishop exchange. Madeline declined unusual. She was calculating something deeper. Move 19, Jack castled kingside, a quiet, stabilizing move. Ben leaned in, his eyes widened. Move 21. Madeline sacrificed her knight, a bold gambit. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the camera crew seemed to forget they were filming. Move 23. Jack brought his queen to h5, a move of elegance. It pinned 2 of Madeline's pieces and threatened a forced mate in 3. Madeline stared at the board. Ben held his breath, and then she laughed. A small, unexpected human laugh, the kind that comes when you finally understand what you've been missing. She looked up at Jack, eyes brighter than before. "You weren't playing to beat me," she said. "You were playing to teach me how to see." Jack smiled gently. "That's what the best games do." She tipped over her king. Checkmate. The camera didn't catch what came next. It didn't capture how Jack picked up the queen with reverence and whispered, "You still dance beautifully, Grace. It didn't catch the way Ben quietly tore out a page from his notebook and handed it to Madeline. She unfolded it. It wasn't a drawing of the board. It was a single sentence written in a child's careful block letters. Sometimes the strongest player is the one who knows when to stop fighting. Madeline folded the note without a word and placed it inside her blazer. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in that checkmate, in that quiet surrender, she had just made her boldest move, yet letting go. Ben liked mornings, not because they were quiet, but because they felt like beginnings. Clean slates. Boards reset. He sat at the kitchen table in their small two-bedroom apartment, above the laundromat, tracing the outline of a knight on the edge of his cereal bowl with his finger. Jack stood at the stove flipping eggs with a grace that came not from culinary training, but from years of handling delicate operations where even silence had weight. "You used Mom's queen yesterday," Ben said without looking up. Jack didn't answer right away. The spatula hovered. "Yeah," he said, finally. She deserved to be on the board again. Ben didn't press further. He never did. He understood that some truths didn't need unpacking. They just needed room to breathe. That afternoon, Ben returned to the Stonebridge lobby like he always did after school. He knew the guards by name. He knew the sound of the elevator doors. And he knew the exact number of ceiling tiles between the receptionist's desk and the cafe. But most of all, he knew the rhythm of the board, even when no one was playing. Today something was different. There was no board on the table. No rook leaning like it always did. No bishop with the tiny crack across its mitre. Instead, there was Madeline Stone sitting on the bench, waiting. "Hi, Ben," she said softly. He stopped, blinked. She never used his name before. "I was hoping we could play," she added, motioning to a brand-new tournament set laid out on the coffee table. Weighted pieces, walnut and maple, gleaming. Ben approached slowly like a deer, unsure of a hand extended with sugar cubes. He sat. Madeline moved first e4, of course, her favorite. Ben responded with e5. It was the first time he'd ever played her seriously. The game unfolded with precision Ruy Lopez opening, classical lines. But Ben's moves weren't aggressive. He invited her in. Every piece he moved opened space, redirected energy. His knights didn't threaten, they covered. His pawns didn't attack, they shielded. By move 12, Madeline frowned. "You're not trying to win." Ben tilted his head. "No." "Then why are we playing?" He glanced at her queen. "Because I think you need to talk." She stared at him. How could a 12-year-old say something like that? But then she remembered the look in his eyes yesterday, the paper note, the quiet in his voice that somehow echoed. He wasn't playing her. He was listening through the board. "You know," she said, moving a rook into a safe square. "I used to play with my dad, every Saturday. Rain or shine. He always let me win until I was 12. Then one day, he didn't." Ben didn't respond, just waited. Madeline looked down at the pieces. He left not long after that. Business trip. Didn't come back. She nudged her knight forward. "Mom said he loved us in his own way, but I stopped playing after that." Ben slid his bishop across the board, an unthreatening diagonal. "You stopped playing, but did you stop loving?" Madeline blinked. She didn't answer. Because she didn't know. The game ended without checkmate. Madeline offered a draw. Ben accepted. They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked Ben, "How do you see things on the board so clearly?" He shrugged. "I don't see the game. I see the person." Madeline tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Ben looked up at her. Eyes soft. Voice even softer. "Some people move fast because they're scared. Some people trade pieces too easily because they don't believe they can win. Some people protect their queen so much, they forget she can fight." Madeline felt her breath catch. Ben didn't play for trophies. He played to understand pain and to release it. Later that evening, Jack found Ben alone with the board, setting it back to starting position. "You played her?" Jack asked. Ben nodded. Jack sat across from him, resting his elbows on the table. "Did you win?" Ben smiled. "No." Jack nodded. "Good." "I listened," Ben added. Jack looked at his son, pride flickering in his eyes. "You always do." The next day, a memo appeared on the company-wide bulletin: Friday evening charity chess tournament for inner-city youths. All staff encouraged to participate. Special guest player, Jack Walker. Beneath it was a second note written in handwriting, none of the employees recognized. Winning isn't everything, but sharing the board that changes lives. B.W. Jack folded the printout and smiled. Ben just kept sketching. But somewhere deep down, something was shifting. People were no longer laughing. They were learning to listen. The thing about loss is it doesn't knock. It lets itself in. And it sits. Quietly. Long after the casseroles are gone and the cards stop coming. Long after people stop asking how you're doing because they've already moved on and you haven't. That was the shape it took for Jack Walker. Not drama. Not tears. Just absence. They had met young Jack and Grace when he was still in uniform, and she was a social worker teaching chess in community centers for at-risk teens. He fell in love the first time she beat him using a reverse London opening. Not because she won, but because she smiled while doing it. A smile full of mercy and fire, like she knew the rules of life and had chosen kindness anyway. They married quietly. Had been 2 years later. Built a world of routines, soft music books, and boards always set between them. Then came the headaches. Then came the tests. Then came the silence. Glioblastoma doesn't care how well you love someone. After Grace died, Jack didn't cry in public. He didn't cancel birthdays. He didn't curse the heavens. He just did one thing. He removed the queen from every board he played. "If I can't protect her in life," he once whispered to Ben, "I won't pretend I can protect her in a game." It wasn't just grief. It was loyalty, a sacred resignation. On a cloudy Thursday, Jack stood in the employee kitchen on the 38th floor, an odd place for a janitor to be, but no one said anything anymore. Things had changed since the chess match. People greeted him. Some even sought his advice not on cleaning supplies, but on strategy. He didn't give them direct answers. He asked them questions instead. What are you not seeing? What piece are you afraid to move? Why are you protecting something that's not in danger? They thought it was about business. It wasn't. Madeline walked in holding a cup of black coffee. No cream, no sugar. Always the same. She hesitated, then approached. "That bishop you used yesterday. The one that locked my queen," she said. "You favored your dark square bishop for most of the game. That's unusual for Caro-Kann systems." Jack looked up from his sandwich. "Was it?" She raised an eyebrow. "You don't do anything without reason." Jack smiled. "That bishop has a name." Madeline blinked. "You name your pieces." "No, just one." He paused. Grace. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Madeline sat down slowly. Your wife, Jack, nodded. He reached into his coat pocket and slid something across the table. A small, faded photograph. 2 people on a checkered picnic blanket. A baby between them. The woman smiling, radiant, wind-blown alive. Madeline stared at it for a long time. "You still play with her on the board," she said quietly. Jack met her eyes. "I never stopped." They sat for a moment, CEO and janitor coffee and sandwich, grief and grace sharing a table too small for either of their stories. Then Madeline whispered something Jack didn't expect. "I never knew my mother played chess. She used to wait for my father to come home and set the board, but he never returned. And when he didn't, She packed the pieces away in a shoebox and never touched them again. Jack studied her face, the cracks in the porcelain invisible to most. "Is that why you play like you do?" he asked. Madeline looked up. "How do I play?" "Like someone who knows exactly what they want," Jack said, "and is terrified of losing it once they have it." She didn't answer. That night, in the quiet of her penthouse, Madeline dug through boxes she hadn't touched in years. She found the shoebox. Inside were wooden chess pieces, worn soft by memory. At the bottom, a note from her mother. "I never blamed him for leaving, but I do blame myself for never playing again. Play Maddie, win or lose. Just don't fold the board too early." She held the queen in her palm. It was lighter than she remembered. But for the first time in decades, it didn't feel heavy. Back at home, Ben asked his father, "Do you think she'll play again?" Jack thought for a moment. "She already is." Ben smiled, then paused. "Will you ever use the queen again?" Every game, Jack stared out the window and whispered, "Maybe." But Ben knew what that meant. Maybe in his father's language meant "I'm hoping to." Central Green wasn't listed on any top 10 parks in the city blog. It didn't have artisanal coffee carts or curated flower gardens. But it had old benches with peeling green paint, a dozen half-shaded sycamores, and 4 square cement tables, where men in jackets too large for summer sat hunched over chessboards, their expressions as weathered as the pieces they moved. It was where Madeline's mother used to take her on Sundays. And now, after 30 years, Madeline Stone had returned alone in a gray trench coat heels, replaced by flats. Hair tied back, not for style, but for quiet. She didn't plan to come here. She hadn't even told her driver where to go. Her hands had guided the steering wheel on their own, like the bishop that drifts diagonally without needing permission from the king. She sat on a familiar bench, watching 2 older men play a game without speaking. The clack of wooden pieces echoed like distant church bells. A pigeon strutted near her foot. The white player moved. The black player scratched his chin, squinted, and responded with a lazy night hop. The tempo was slow, almost meditative. She felt something stir, not memory, something deeper. Madeline closed her eyes. For a moment, she could smell the peanut butter sandwiches her mother used to pack. Feel the weight of her small fingers curling around a black knight. Hear her mother's voice, calm, reassuring. "You don't have to win, Maddie. Just learn what each piece is willing to give for the one it loves." She opened her eyes, suddenly breath catching in her throat. How long had it been since she thought of her mother without bitterness? At the third table, a boy no older than Ben sat across from a man with a beard and trembling hands. The boy wasn't winning, but he wasn't trying to. He played like Ben's soft hands, gentle eyes, strategic compassion. She got up and walked toward them. The man looked up and gestured to the empty space beside him. "You play." Madeline hesitated, then sat. He slid the board around. "I haven't touched a piece in 20 years, she said. He smiled. "That means you're overdue." Her first move was slow E4 again, a move she knew too well. Comfort in symmetry. The man countered with CC6. Caro Khan. Her breath caught. Jack's defense. He wasn't here, but somehow he was. The match lasted only 15 minutes, but in those minutes, Madeline didn't think about mergers or market shifts. She didn't think about her father's absence or the awards lining her glass office. She only thought about intention, about timing, about how much you reveal when you move a pawn instead of a queen. She lost, of course, but when she shook the man's hand, her palm felt warm. Before she left, she wandered to the bench under the tall sycamore. It was old moss growing in the cracks. Her mother used to sit there with a book while she played. Beneath the bench, tucked behind a loose brick, she found something unexpected. A folded note. The paper was brittle, but the ink still intact. To the next girl who finds this, I hope you play brave. And I hope you don't wait too long to forgive someone, especially yourself. M. She didn't cry. She smiled. For the first time in a long time, the anger left her bones. That evening, Jack noticed something different in Madeline when she entered the lobby. Her shoulders weren't squared. Her gaze wasn't as sharp. She looked human. "You were out," he said casually. She nodded. A park, some trees, some ghosts. Jack placed a rook on the board. "Did you find them?" Madeline met his eyes. "No," she said. "I think I finally let them rest." Jack nodded slowly. Ben appeared at the edge of the room, sketchpad in hand. He looked between them and smiled. Not wide, not obvious, just enough. "Did you play?" Jack asked. Madeline looked at Ben. "I lost." Ben's grin deepened. "Then you played well." They didn't play a game that night. But they sat at the board, the pieces untouched. Just 3 people. 3 pasts. And a silence that wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. Like the quiet after a storm. Or the breath before a kiss. At 6:47 a.m., the Stonebridge Tower lobby was bathed in cold, golden light. The marble floor glowed, the silence was sacred, and Jack Walker moved like a man who respected both. He pushed the mop slowly, rhythmically, not because he had to, but because he chose to do it well. Doing something well, even if no one noticed, was a kind of prayer. But this morning, someone noticed. Ben sat at his usual corner near the chess table, flipping through his sketch pad. His knees dangled off the bench, one sock falling just below his ankle. He'd drawn a full page of tactical sequences, not for class, not for glory, just because it calmed him. Jack passed by and gently tapped the boy's shoulder. "Hey, Professor," he smiled. "How's the lab coming?" Ben pointed to one page in particular, a puzzle board, 15 moves in, a knight hanging, the queen vulnerable. "This is you, Dad." Jack squinted at the paper. Which piece? Ben looked up. His eyes were clearer than morning light. "You're the bishop. Quiet. Watching. And if you move now, everything changes." Jack didn't know what to say. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood too well. Ben didn't just play chess. He felt it. And lately, Jack was starting to believe that maybe Ben was feeling him pushing gently at the edge of a comfort zone that had long turned into a prison. Later that day, Jack was summoned to the 42nd floor. He had only been there once years ago before Grace passed, when he still believed in promotions and structured futures. Now it felt like stepping onto foreign terrain. The conference room had glass walls, the kind meant to look modern, but always felt too exposed. Sunlight streamed across a long oak table, where 6 executives sat in starched suits, looking entirely too awake for 9 a.m. Madeline was already standing at the head of the table. She didn't introduce Jack. She didn't need to. "Mr. Walker," she said, "how would you teach strategy to a room full of people who believe they already understand it?" Jack looked at her, then at the others, then walked toward the dry erase board behind her. He picked up the marker, uncapped it, and drew a simple 8-or-8 grid. "I wouldn't start with the queen," he said. "I'd start with the pawn." The room grew still. Jack turned around. Everyone wants to talk about leverage market positioning speed, but real strategy, real lasting influence, it starts with the quiet piece, the overlooked one, the one that moves one square at a time. He clicked the cap back on the marker. You don't win because you move fast. You win because you see 10 moves ahead and stay calm enough to wait for them. Silence. Madeline folded her arms. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not admiration. Conviction. After the session, as the others left, Madeline lingered. Jack stood by the board, staring at the half-erased grid. "You were never really just a janitor," she said. Jack didn't look away. I was exactly what I needed to be for my son. She walked closer, close enough to see the lines in his hands, the scars just below the collar, the quiet strength in his stillness. But now she said, "Maybe it's time to be something more." He chuckled softly. Says the Queen. Madeline's smile was barely there, but it was real. "I'm not asking you to wear a suit. I'm asking you to teach what you already live." He hesitated. "I've been off the board a long time." She nodded. "Then start as a pawn." But start. That night, Jack and Ben sat at home eating chili from mismatched bowls. Ben was unusually quiet. Jack finally asked, "Did something happen at school?" Ben shook his head, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Jack opened it. It was a flyer community tournament and strategy workshop hosted by Stonebridge Foundation, led facilitator Jack Walker. Jack blinked. Ben said nothing. He just smiled. "I guess you're moving." Jack looked at his son and realized something profound. Ben wasn't afraid of Jack stepping forward. He was afraid of Jack never trying. Later, before bed, Jack stared at the chessboard on their living room shelf. He lifted the white bishop, traced its smooth lines, then carefully placed it on the board. Across from it, he placed a queen, and whispered to himself, "All right, Grace, let's play again." It was just past 3 p.m. when 6 executives from Stonebridge Financial stepped into the sunlit seminar room on the 40th floor. They carried laptops, phones, egos, and the faint air of impatience that clings to people who rarely hear the word no. The invitation had read, "Strategic Immersion Workshop, hosted by Jack Walker. Mandatory." No one knew what to expect. No slides, no pre-read. Just 7 folding chairs in a circle and a long oak table in the middle. On the table sat a single item, a tournament-grade chessboard walnut and maple squares polished to a soft gleam. Jack was already there. He wasn't wearing a suit. Just his usual navy shirt sleeves, rolled military watch on his wrist, a slight stain of coffee on his left cuff. He looked like a man who had shown up for something simple, but meant every second of it. He greeted no one with handshakes, just eye contact. "Good afternoon," they nodded. Some murmured back. "We're going to play," Jack said. "6 of you? 1 board. I'll take black." He moved to the far side of the table. "You'll play white, together." A pause. "All 6 of us," one of them asked. As a team, Jack nodded. "You'll make your moves by majority vote. 1 turn, 1 collective decision." There was a chuckle in the back. "What's the catch?" Jack looked at them evenly. "No talking." The silence that followed was almost humorous. "No talking," repeated a woman in HR, brows raised. Jack folded his arms. "No talking. No phones. No whispering. No writing. No eye-rolling." He leaned slightly forward. "Just think. Together. Quietly. If your team can't make 1 good decision per move without speaking, maybe you're not making good decisions when you do." The challenge was simple. The execution was anything but. The executives sat around the board looking at each other like strangers trapped in a strange ritual. The first move took nearly 4 minutes. Someone nudged a pawn forward tentatively. E4. Jack responded instantly with C6. Another pause. Glances passed. Hands hovered. D4. D5. They had walked straight into the Caro-Kann defense. Jack said nothing, his face unreadable, his posture calm. They debated with furrowed brows and raised fingers, not with words, but with glances. Shrugs lifted eyebrows. The same nonverbal cues they used every day in meetings without realizing it. By move 8, their queen's bishop was awkwardly placed. Their knight had been retracted. Jack had quietly claimed the center. By move 12, one of the executives, a man known for interrupting interns mid-sentence, stood up and walked to the window, unable to handle the constraint. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Jack glanced up. "And yet, you agreed to it," The others stayed seated, and the board continued. Ben watched from the back of the room, legs swinging over the edge of a supply cabinet. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, not the moves, but the people. Their hands, their shifting shoulders, their blinking patterns. Ben wasn't analyzing the game. He was analyzing the players. By move 18, Jack sacrificed a pawn. They thought it was a blunder. They advanced, eager. By move 21, he forked their queen and rook with a knight, an elegant tactic sprung from patience. The board shifted. The air changed. They grew quieter, not by rule, but by awe. At move 24, Jack didn't move right away. He leaned back and asked, "What do you believe is your most important piece?" They froze, unsure if it was rhetorical. He answered for them. "Most people say the queen or the king. But I've seen wars turned by pawns. I've seen a single bishop decide the fate of entire teams. The piece that matters most is the one you underestimate." He made his move. Silence deepened. By move 28, they had lost their queen. At move 30, they tipped the king. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped, because the lesson had already landed long before checkmate. Jack stood. You didn't lose because you couldn't play. You lost because you couldn't listen without control. You mistook silence for weakness and forgot that pressure reveals character. He walked to the door. "Thank you for the game." He didn't wait for applause, didn't linger. He just nodded at Ben, who had drawn a 6-pointed star with a single bishop in the center, and they walked out together. That evening, one of the executives stayed behind. He reset the board alone. Quietly, he moved e4, waited, then moved c5 for Jack, then nc3, then stopped. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about why he played at all. And upstairs in her office, Madeline Stone stood at the window, watching the sun begin to set across the skyline, like a bishop cutting through a golden diagonal. She whispered to herself, he didn't teach them to play better. He taught them to play truer. The chessboard sat under soft yellow light in the corner of the Stonebridge Foundation lounge, far from the elevators, the traffic, and the pressure of perception. There were no cameras, no spectators, just Jack, just Madeline, and 2 queens on the board, both in their rightful places. It had taken months, or maybe years, for both of them to find their way back to this moment. Madeline held the white queen gently in her hand before the game began. She didn't place it yet, just held it. "It used to terrify me," she said. "The queen, all that power, all that visibility. It felt like being loved when you didn't know how to stay." Jack said nothing. He watched her quietly. "My father disappeared after my 12th birthday. He left behind a board, a half-played game, and 1 note. You'll understand one day, Maddie. Life isn't always about finishing what you start." I hated that note. She placed the queen down. Square D1, home. Jack reached into the pouch and removed his queen, too. He hadn't touched it since the night Ben was born. He placed her softly at D8. For the first time in over a decade, both Grace and Madeline's mother were on the board. Madeline played E4. Jack replied with E5. Symmetry. They moved in silence, not out of restraint, but reverence. By move 7, the game had taken shape, the Italian game one of grace, of rhythm. Not aggressive, not defensive, just curious. Ben watched from a nearby table, sipping cocoa. He wasn't drawing today. He was feeling. His father's spine more upright than usual. Madeline's hands no longer trembling over pieces. 2 people who once lost everything, now daring to play with everything back on the board. At move 10, Jack offered a pawn. Madeline refused. She wasn't here to win. She was here to understand. At move 13, Madeline moved her queen, not for attack, but to protect a bishop. Jack responded with a knight retreat, a humble step backward, to open room for the most delicate sequence he'd designed in years. This wasn't war. It was choreography. By move 17, both sides had castled. The battlefield was set. But no one pressed. No one forced. Instead, they built, controlled, waited. Madeline broke the silence at move 21. Grace was your queen, wasn't she? Jack didn't hesitate. Still is. You never played her piece after she passed. Jack moved a pawn. Slowly. I didn't know how to let her go without feeling like I'd betrayed her. Madeline responded with a knight sidestep, a move not in any book. I think you let her stay. That wasn't betrayal. Jack looked up. Her eyes weren't hard anymore. They weren't guarded. They were present. He smiled. Move 24. Madeline moved her queen diagonally. Jack mirrored the action. Their pieces faced each other, two monarchs in a silent standstill. Ben's heart skipped. He could feel it. This wasn't chess anymore. This was recognition. Jack reached across the board, gently tapped his queen, then said, "When Grace played, she taught the kids something I never forgot. A good queen doesn't dominate the board. She listens to it." Madeline laughed a soft, surprised sound. Then I was a terrible queen for years. Jack's smile deepened. No. You were a queen defending herself in a kingdom that wasn't built for kindness. She looked at the board again. At the queen, she'd feared avoided, locked away. And for the first time, she didn't see it as a burden. She saw herself. Powerful. Capable. Human. By move 29, Jack could have taken her knight. He didn't. Madeline could have forked his rook. She declined. This wasn't about advantage. This was about integrity. About giving space to heal. And still, the board sang. At move 33, Jack offered a draw. Madeline looked up. "We're not done," she said. He tilted his head. "No. But we've said what we needed to." She paused, then reached out and touched his hand just briefly, just long enough. "Then maybe. The next game," she whispered, "we play together." Jack didn't respond in words. He simply tipped his king, not in defeat, but in respect. Madeline did the same. The two queens remained upright, side by side. That night, Ben opened his sketch pad and wrote a single sentence. Today they stopped playing against each other and started playing for something. The lobby of Stonebridge Tower had never seen so many children. Their voices filled the marble space with laughter, shoes, squeaking fingers, pointing at giant tournament brackets, projected onto a wall that usually displayed quarterly earnings. Dozens of tables had been arranged in neat rows, each hosting a handmade chess set, plastic wood cardboard, some missing rooks replaced with bottle caps or carved erasers. It didn't matter. Today wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Jack stood near the registration desk in a crisp shirt and blazer, not tailored, but clean. He wore no tie. Around him, volunteers handed out snacks, water scorecards. Parents mingled. Veterans in navy hats and faded jackets shared quiet nods across the room. Madeline in jeans and a navy pullover stood by a table marked Exhibition Match, CEO versus Youth Finalist. Her opponent, Ben Walker. Ben sat across from her calmly. He wore a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled a pencil tucked behind his ear. His sketch pad was closed today. Madeline looked at him and smiled. "Ready to play me for real this time?" Ben nodded. "I still won't try to win." She raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" He looked at her queen. "Because this time I think you're listening." Jack stood back, arms crossed, trying to appear neutral. But his fingers twitched the way they did. When tension rose a habit from his old life, when seconds could mean survival. The match began. Ben played white. His opening f4 was unorthodox. Madeline paused, then replied with D5. Aggressive. Bold. They played faster than before, the pieces clicking gently. Rhythm smooth. It wasn't rushed, it was fluent. By move 9, Ben had sacrificed a knight to open the center. Madeline declined the bait. By move 14, Madeline launched a flank attack with her bishop. Ben rotated his rook, reinforcing defense with grace. The room had gone quieter. Children gathered around. Even the camera crews didn't speak. It was a conversation not with words, but truths. At move 20, Ben paused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He pushed it across the table. You should read this before the end. Madeline hesitated. What is it? Ben shrugged. It's from someone who left you a game unfinished. Jack felt something shift. A silence inside the silence. Madeline opened the envelope slowly. Inside a handwritten note, shaky fading ink. Maddie, I taught you chess because I didn't know how to teach you life. I ran, not because I stopped loving you, but because I was afraid you'd see how broken I was. I don't know if I'll be around when you're old enough to understand, but I hope one day someone sits across from you and reminds you that you were never the pawn. You were always the queen. And I never taught you how to lose because I knew you'd figure out how to win your own way. Her hands trembled. Ben didn't speak. He just moved his bishop. Check. Madeline stared at the board. Not at the threat. At the beauty of it. Ben had set it up not to trap her, but to free her. She had never needed to win against her father. She only needed to understand why he left. And now, somehow, she did. She reached forward, tapped her king once, then twice. Resigned. But her smile, it was the first real smile Jack had ever seen her give. She stood, walked around the table, and wrapped Ben in a hug. He stiffened for a second, then melted into it. Thank you, she whispered. Ben looked up. It wasn't from me. He pointed to Jack. He kept the letter. All these years, he waited for the right game. Later, as the crowd thinned and sunlight faded into evening, Amber Madeline found Jack standing near the window, watching the last game of the tournament wrap up. You saved that letter all this time, she asked softly. Jack didn't turn. Grace kept it. She said, some messages take longer to arrive than others. Madeline stood beside him. How did you know this was the right moment? Jack finally looked at her. Because I saw the queen return to the board. That night, Ben sat at home writing in his sketch pad again. He didn't draw pieces. He wrote, there are games where no one wins, but everyone leaves lighter. He placed the page under his pillow like a keepsake, like a promise. The cemetery sat on a hill just outside the city where trees whispered rather than swayed, and wind moved, not to disturb, but to remember. Madeline's stone had never been there before, not to that place, but she knew she was in the right spot the moment she stepped out of the car and saw a chess piece, a small hand-carved bishop resting at the foot of a grave that bore the name Grace Walker, beloved wife, mother teacher. She moved gently, but changed everything she touched. Madeline knelt beside the stone. She wasn't sure what brought her there, only that after the tournament, after Ben's hug after the letter. There was one more move left to make. She opened her coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in navy cloth, a bishop carved from white ash edges, smoothed by time. On the bottom, she'd burned one word with her office soldering pen. Grace. She set it down gently beside the older piece, the one Jack had left. 2 bishops, facing forward. Different woods, same purpose. Madeline sat back on her heels, arms resting on her knees. She spoke not to the sky, not to the stone, but to the absence. You never knew me, but you knew him. And I think I needed to know that someone like you existed before I could ever understand someone like him. She paused. Jack doesn't talk much about love, but he plays it. Every move, every game. Another pause. The breeze brushed her hair back, soft as a hand. Thank you for loving him before I met him, and for raising a boy who knows how to listen when adults forget how. She smiled then quietly, as if not to disturb Grace's peace, then stood and left the bishop behind. Jack was waiting near the car. He didn't ask how long she'd been, didn't ask what she said. He simply opened the door for her, then slid into the driver's seat, both hands on the wheel. They sat in silence for a moment. I brought her something Madeline said. Jack nodded. She'd have liked you, he murmured. Madeline glanced over. Would she? He smiled softly. Grace didn't like perfect people. She liked people still learning how to carry things they thought they'd buried. They drove in silence until they hit the edge of the city. Then Madeline broke it. Can I ask you something? Always. When did you know you still had more to give? Jack didn't answer right away. He turned down a side street, pulled into a quiet overlook facing the skyline, where the city looked like a chessboard, bathed in orange light. Then he said, the day Ben moved his knight. And I realized he was no longer playing the way I taught him. He was playing better. And it scared me, because if he was still growing, I couldn't afford to stop. Madeline looked at him for a long time. There was no romance in his face, but there was depth. And in that depth, she found herself leaning just a little closer than before. Back at Jack's apartment that evening, Ben was on the floor assembling a small magnetic chess set he was building for a visually impaired friend. When he looked up and saw Madeline carrying a casserole dish, he blinked. You're staying for dinner? Madeline smiled. Only if your dad lets me take his rook. Ben grinned. He'll give it to you if he thinks you're not after it. Jack raised a brow. He's not wrong. They ate on mismatched plates, sitting cross-legged on the floor. No formalities, just warmth, just the simplicity of presence. Later that night, as Madeline got up to leave, she stopped at the door. Would it be all right if I visited her again? She asked Jack. He met her eyes. You already are, every time you remember her kindness. Madeline nodded, then reached into her coat pocket and pressed something into his palm. A bishop, but not the one she'd left. A new one. Hand-carved. Unfinished. No name. For whatever piece you're still learning to play. She turned and left. Jack stood there long after she'd gone, bishop in hand. Heart. Not heavy, but aware. He turned toward the board and placed the bishop down. Not as grace, not as memory, but as something else, possibility. There was no announcement. No one watched. No cameras. No crowd. Not even Ben. Just the quiet tick of a wall clock and the hum of late evenings settling over the lounge on the 40th floor. The board was already set. Jack sat on one side, Madeline on the other, 2 cups of lukewarm tea between them untouched. The air wasn't tense. It was reverent, like 2 musicians tuning instruments, before a duet they didn't need an audience for. No timer, Madeline asked. Jack shook his head. No timer. No goal. No win. No lose. Just play. She nodded, moved a pawn forward. E4. Of course. Jack smiled and mirrored the move. E5. For several turns they stayed quiet, opening as they always had, Ruy Lopez classical development. But the rhythm was different. Not cautious, not competitive, just connected. By move 10, Madeline's bishop offered a trade. Jack accepted. No hesitation, no trap. They exchanged without tension, like 2 people who had finally stopped trying to protect themselves from each other. Move 13. Jack fianchettoed his king's bishop not for defense, but for breath. Space. Move 14. Madeline advanced her rook, not to dominate, but to be seen. Neither of them said a word, but everything they felt was already on the board. Jack broke the silence first. I used to think strategy was everything, that if I planned far enough ahead I could avoid pain. He moved his knight not to threaten, but to stand by a vulnerable pawn. Madeline responded, softening her structure. I used to think control was power, that if I never let anyone close enough, they couldn't leave. Jack nodded slowly. They weren't talking about chess anymore. They hadn't been for several moves. Move 20. Their queens faced each other diagonally. No threat, just presence. Two forces equal in weight, neither yielding, neither needing to. Ben, unseen, peeked in from the doorway and stopped. He didn't enter. He just watched. Not the game, but the stillness between them. The way Jack's fingers rested on the edge of the table. The way Madeline leaned in slightly, like listening for something not yet spoken. This wasn't a game. This was acknowledgement. At move 24, Madeline moved her queen deep into Jack's territory, a bold central placement. He could have forced her out, but he didn't. He rotated his rook away, giving her space. Madeline's eyes flickered. Why didn't you take it? Jack looked up. Because you weren't attacking. You were inviting. She breathed out. A half laugh, a half release. And here I thought I was subtle. Jack's grin was faint. You never were. That's what made you brilliant. Move 27. He advanced his king, no reason, no safety play. Just a step toward her. She did the same. They were both vulnerable now, and neither cared. Madeline reached across the board, touched a pawn gently, not to move it, just to rest her finger on something simple. Solid. We've both lost games before, she said quietly. But this one, I don't want to finish. I want it to keep going. Jack nodded. He closed his hand around the king. Then let's not end it. He tipped it slightly, then stopped halfway. Not in surrender, not in victory. Just enough to let her see I'm not here to win. I'm here to stay. Madeline mirrored him. Her king tilted, almost resting. They looked at each other, two people no longer building walls, just bridges. A moment later, Ben stepped in, smiling softly. So, who and Jack glanced at Madeline. She replied first. We didn't finish. Ben blinked. Draw Jack shook his head. We called it. Ben tilted his head, while Jack reached over and gently closed the board. Because some games aren't meant to be finished. They're meant to be lived. That night, Jack placed the chessboard back on the shelf, but left two pieces standing: his king, her queen. Side by side. No check, no mate, just possibility. The morning air in Manhattan had that golden quality that only came once in a while, when the city held its breath in gratitude rather than urgency. And on the rooftop of Weston Global, with its panoramic view of Central Park in bloom, something rare was about to begin. Ben stood nervously beside Jack, adjusting the collar of his too big navy blazer. His fingers clutched the edge of a white envelope, marked with the gold seal of Stuyvesant Academy, the elite chess academy known across the nation. Across from them, Madeline smiled warmly. Her tailored suit had a softness today, a pastel hue instead of her usual jet black command. She held a certificate, the ink still fresh. You sure he's ready? Jack asked, his voice low, protective. Madeline stepped closer, crouched to Ben's level. Jack, he's not just ready. He's already 10 moves ahead of the rest. Ben's eyes lit up. Do I really get to go? Jack crouched beside him. Only if you want a champ. You've already made me proud. Ben looked down at the chess pin on his lapel, a gift from Madeline after their tag team game 3 weeks ago. Then he looked up, eyes glistening. I want to. I really want to. Madeline handed him the certificate. Then welcome to the national team. Ben threw his arms around her neck before anyone could stop him. Jack blinked. Madeline froze for a heartbeat, then returned the hug, not as a CEO, not as a public figure, but as someone who for the first time in years felt seen beyond the board. Later that evening, the celebration continued at a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of Brooklyn. The three of them sat outside under string lights, sipping cocoa and laughing over the memory of Ben's surprise checkmate against a grandmaster on Zoom. A jazz trio played softly nearby. The city slowed, and something softer than victory began to settle in Jack's chest. So Madeline said, eyes glinting with something mischievous, "I have another proposition." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You offering Ben a signing bonus?" She chuckled. "No. This one's for you." She slid a folder across the table. Jack hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a letterhead titled, "Director of Strategic Insight and Adaptive Thinking, Weston Global." Beneath it, his name. Jack Carter. "You want me to be?" What exactly? Madeline leaned back. "Exactly what you've always been, a master tactician, not just with pawns and rooks, but with people, teams, real-world chaos." Jack closed the folder. "I was just a janitor." "You were never just anything," she said. "You're the reason this company still breathes integrity. And you taught me more about vision in 3 weeks than any boardroom ever did." Ben whispered, "Dad, say yes." Jack looked at him, at the boy who once stood silent in corners now glowing under starlight. He turned back to Madeline. "I'm not great with ties. We have a casual Fridays policy." She grinned. He laughed. "Then I guess I'll need to buy a shirt." As the jazz music picked up, Jack stood and extended a hand across the table. "Dance with me." CEO Madeline blinked. "There's no one else dancing." "Then I guess we'll start the board." She stood, took his hand, and for the first time in years, stepped not into power, but into presence. They swayed under the lights. Ben leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, watching them with a knowing smile. The war veteran, the boy, genius, the CEO with armor of steel. Now just 3 people learning how to trust. Back at home much later, Jack opened a small wooden box he hadn't touched in years. Inside, next to his medals and a worn photograph of Ben as a toddler, sat a single chess piece. A knight, its edges worn smooth from years of touch. He picked it up, held it in his palm. "I was always meant to protect. I just forgot the board wasn't always war." He placed the piece beside a newer one, the queen. Madeline had left it in his jacket pocket after the dance. A note folded around it read, "For the one man who never needed to win to make me surrender." In the final days of spring, Weston Global unveiled its new public initiative, Second Moves, a mentorship program for veterans, single parents, and gifted youth from underserved communities, using chess as the gateway to self-discovery and connection. At its launch, Jack stood beside Madeline as co-founder. Ben opened the event with a 5-minute blindfolded blitz match and won. And in the audience, no one laughed. They stood, they clapped, and many, especially the older veterans and single parents in the crowd, cried, not because of a game, but because someone like them had just proved. No move is ever final. No life ever too late. No heart ever beyond checkmate if only we're willing to play again. Sometimes, all it takes is one quiet man, one brilliant move, and one child's unwavering belief to change the way the world sees strength. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment and say, "Hello, we read every one, and it truly makes our day." And if you'd like more stories like this about kindness, quiet resilience, and unexpected love, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, just a seat saved for you right here. Thank you sincerely for spending time with us today. Until next time, take care of yourself and of those quiet heroes around you.